In front of me today is the only PC laptop that I have been excited about in a very long time. Now, I'm not sure if I'm gonna love this thing or hate this thing or just find it kind of strange, but this is the new Microsoft Surface Laptop Studio. It's sort of a hybrid between their professional laptops and their very cool but very outdated Microsoft Surface Studio. Now, I bought this thing in its cheapest configuration, which is like $1,600. And at that price, I was honestly kind of surprised. I was like, hey, that seems like not that much money for this pretty radical design. But what we're gonna find out today is if it actually stacks up, or if maybe you should go for the more expensive ones, or if this whole idea is just a little bit weird. And of course, we're going to be comparing it to what Apple has to offer, the M1 Max, as well as, I guess, a 16-inch Intel MacBook Pro, which would be somewhat similar to this in terms of size. So without any further ado, let's crack into this thing. You see, it's not very often that I take a look at a Microsoft product on this channel, but when I do, I buy the cheapest one. But today we're gonna find out what that gets us here in Microsoft land. So here we have the box. Ooh, look at that. We got some nice tissue paper here around this laptop. And there it is. I have to say, smaller than I would have thought. This base configuration comes with an 11th gen Core i5, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigabytes of storage. That's pretty interesting. I mean, I guess you could argue that that is somewhat comparable in terms of pricing and configuration to like an M1 MacBook Pro with extra RAM. That would be less expensive, but this also has the crazy wacky screen, so let's hear it out. Ooh. Oh, wow. That is a thick boy. Oh my goodness. Look at the absolute size of this lad. Let's see what else we get in the box. Probably just some documentation and a charger, but that's okay. Nice presentation. So let's see what we have in terms of ports and layout. Obviously for charging, we get the Microsoft Surface proprietary charger, but we should still be able to charge via USB-C, of which there are 2 on this side, and that's it. That's pretty much the same I/O that you would get with an M1 Mac, although you could argue that since you don't need to use one of the USB-Cs while you're charging, that this would maybe be a little bit better. Oh no! The unboxing experience is ruined. The finish is very interesting. I'm not 100% sure what this is actually made out of, but it feels rubberized. I mean, I'm sure it's aluminum, but let's go ahead and open it up. Oh my. What the heck? Why is that so floppy? Okay. Alright, so look at that. You can kind of have this in like normal laptop mode. That's really cool. But then we do that. Now this I was not expecting. The display is just kind of like dangling here. I kind of thought it was gonna float like an iPad Pro, but I guess it sort of magnetically stays like this. That's interesting. Why would you want it to be like this? What would you be able to do in this orientation? That is so interesting. By the way, this is also my first time using Windows 11, which is now being set up. But if I'm remembering correctly, yeah, that's pretty cool. Look at that, it's time to add the Microsoft account using it in tablet mode, but let's say I just want to use the hardware keyboard. Well, simple enough. I kind of like this. This is a really interesting take on what a laptop could be. Now, I'm gonna have to do some more experimentation with this. This is a really interesting idea, and I'm curious to explore it a little bit more. So why don't we cut to a little old montage, and then we'll come back once I've had some time to use this thing. So I've spent the last couple of hours getting to know the Surface Laptop Studio, and this is an honestly really intriguing device. And as I've been testing this thing, I've been wondering, what if I were to try to switch to the Windows 11 Surface Laptop Studio full-time for a week, power off all iPads and MacBooks that I have for testing and for daily use, and just use this thing to see how it does. Let me know if you'd like to see a video like that in the comments below. But my initial impressions on this thing are a lot of good and a decent number of bad, I have to be honest. I like this device a lot, but if there's one thing that it isn't, it's svelte and beautiful. This thing is a bit of a chungus. I mean, take a look at it compared to a MacBook Pro. It's not really the same sort of light, thin, cohesive look. Now, I get what they were going for here with the design of this laptop. It's very functional, it's very practical. We've got this like bump out on the bottom here, which adds battery capacity, adds cooling capacity. You can tuck a Surface Pen underneath this tray so it can hide away under the device. It makes sense, but by God is it ugly. I just cannot get over how ugly it looks. It looks like someone stacked a normal thin laptop on top of some other laptop. And that's just when it's closed. If you open the screen and fold it all the way over, I mean, it gets even weirder to look at. Now, I think as far as this type of laptop goes, this implementation, this is probably as good as it can get. But it is a little bit weird. Also, having this weird split on the lid of the device with the Microsoft logo down, like when you use this thing as a normal laptop, it looks weird to have a logo on the bottom. It's just little things like this that just strike the eye as like, huh, it's a little bit strange, isn't it? Now, when the device is open, on the other hand, I think it's actually very attractive. It looks very similar to the minimalist design language that Microsoft has been using for a little while now, and I have to say, it holds up. I mean, you wouldn't think that this is a crazy convertible folding tablet when you look at it just as a normal laptop. We've got rounded display corners. The whole screen actually looks a lot like an iPad Pro. The keyboard is magnificent to type on. It's absolutely sublime. It has fantastic key travel, feedback, tactility, and clickiness. And the trackpad is also a big area this year. So in the past, Microsoft has had pretty good trackpads, but this one I think is a good bit better because it's actually essentially a force touch trackpad. You can click anywhere on it, kind of like what Apple does. Now, this doesn't feel quite as good as Apple's. The tracking is definitely not as good as Apple's, and I had to tweak some of the settings. I turned up the sensitivity, I turned up the mouse speed, and it's getting there. It's probably the best Windows trackpad I've ever used, but I'm sorry, nobody can compete with Apple. They just have the best trackpads, and that's just a fact. But as cool as this device is, I think one of its biggest drawbacks is what's inside of it. I can't help but call out Microsoft's and Intel's logical incongruity. Both companies have released several major ad campaigns over the past year targeting Apple for their lack of ability to game, while positioning their platforms as gaming friendly.
I love my games. Then there's the price. Yeah.
This simply doesn't make sense in the context of the actual devices. Intel's latest ad, which I made a video on just yesterday, it showcased this very laptop. They applauded themselves and Microsoft for having a multitude of compatible games, and while this is technically true, the processors in any of the chic and premium thin Windows laptops at M1 price points simply don't support that. I fired up Sid Meier's Civilization 6 on both the M1 Mac running in Rosetta and in the Surface Laptop Studio running natively, and, well, the more expensive Surface wasn't exactly a wonderful experience. The performance of this thing versus the M1 MacBook Pro at the same resolution and the same settings was basically the same. That's not great considering that the Surface is running it natively and the Mac is running through Rosetta. They're putting all of these advertising dollars into saying, hey, look at these cool Microsoft Intel devices that can play games at comparable prices to an M1, but this is not a gaming laptop, and you shouldn't buy this for gaming, so it's weird that they advertise it as gaming capable. And speaking of performance, the performance on this thing really isn't its strong suit. I ran a full 10-minute Cinebench test on both the Surface Studio and the M1 MacBook Pro, which revealed that the $300 cheaper Mac absolutely crushed the Core i5-11300H. It wasn't even close. The Mac scored 77-71, and the PC, well, yeah. And I'll let you in on a little secret. You can throw as much money as you want at this thing. You can spend upwards of $3,000 on the fully loaded versions of this. And well, that'll get you RTX 3050 Ti graphics that will definitely outperform the M1. The CPU never will. Just think about that for a second. You can spend over $3,000 on this thing and it still won't have as good of a CPU as a base model MacBook Pro or even a MacBook Air. That's not great. I'll tell you what is great though, the battery life. This thing, because it's a Chungus, has a pretty Chungus battery, and it sort of compensates for the fact that it's not running Apple Silicon, it's running Intel, so there's fans going all the time. One thing that does bother me though is actually the fan placement. So most laptops exhaust behind the laptop, away from you, but this one exhausts here on the sides by the palm rests. And you can feel the hot air. You can feel the palm rests heating up. You can feel the air coming out of the side. It's not exactly pleasant, and this thing is an Intel chip. It runs pretty hot. But apart from lackluster performance and slightly irritating fans, I really do like this thing. I think, kind of like an iPad Pro, this is squarely targeted towards artists. For someone like myself, I can't necessarily see a ton of utility in the 3 different modes that we have access to, but I appreciate how illustrators, graphic designers, and even YouTubers like me making thumbnails in Photoshop would be able to take advantage of this really interesting versatility. I also really like tent mode for content consumption. It's a great put it on your lap while in bed format, and having access to the trackpad is unique from other folding 2-in-1s that put the keyboard behind the device. The one thing that I think is really clear about this device is that unlike other 2-in-1s, it's not really a tablet, right? It might be objectively considered a tablet when you put it down like this, you can use it with a pen, but it's not really something that you want to pick up, right? This is pretty thick and pretty heavy and pretty awkward to hold, and if you hold it vertically, it doesn't really help things. It's not really one-handable because it's pretty hefty. So this is definitely a use on the table tablet, which I think is why Microsoft went for this folding design that slightly angles the display when it's on a Surface, a Microsoft Surface, you might even say. It's an interesting device. I really do want to get to know it a little bit more. In the past, when I've taken a look at Microsoft Surface products, I've returned them or I've kept them for a little while and then sold them. This one, I want to hear out. I want to keep this thing around and use it. Let me know if you want to see that other video idea that I was talking about where I switched to this thing entirely for like a week or two. I'm definitely interested in hearing what you guys think about this device. Is it better than an M1? Is it worse than an M1? Is it just different? Let me know in the comments below, and with that, I will see you all in the next video.